anything but the truth. What's the truth, damn it?
I'm afraid, all right? You want to hear me say it? You want to break me down? All right, I'm afraid.
Yo, Adrian. Dudes, dudettes, welcome back. This is episode 117 of The Anxious Truth. Welcome to the show. Call it the show. That's my thing now. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming by. That was a quote from Rocky 3, hence the Yo, Adrian, my Rocky imitation. I'm a sucker for the Rocky movies. If I find them on somewhere, I'm going to watch them, even though I've seen them all already. I'll watch them anyway. Anyway, in that scene from Rocky 3, Adrian and Rocky are on the beach in LA, and Adrian just breaks Rocky down. Disaster. He has to admit that he's afraid. And that leads me to today's podcast episode. I was joined for about 30, 35 minutes by my good friend, Dr. B. Bridget Cooper is back. You all loved her the first time, which is great, and you'll love her this time too. And we talked for about 30, 35 minutes on the topic of fear. And this is going to be really good because we started from the premise that many people are absolutely resistant to the idea of experiencing fear. They immediately judge it negatively. They call it a failure just for feeling fear, even when they know that part of the recovery process is learning to experience fear in a productive way. So we started there, and then we just kind of went off on a tangent. We went sort of careening wildly out of control. At one point, Dr. B kind of brought some heat with her model of fear, which is based on trust, control, and fear. You guys are going to dig that. So I want to get rolling. Before we do, you know what I'm going to do here. You guys are getting used to it now. My book. It's called The Anxious Truth, a step-by-step guide to understanding and overcoming anxiety, panic, and agoraphobia. You will find it on my website at theanxioustruth.com/recovery guide. Basically everything you've ever heard me say into a microphone in any format, just in much greater detail and laid out in a very logical, easy to follow sequence. So it's as if you are taking a course in how to recover from your anxiety disorder. I have put a tremendous amount of my life into this book. I was really hoping to create something very useful, and by all accounts, I did. So I'm going to keep hawking it at you because I think it's a useful tool, and that's why I put it out there. So theanxioustruth.com/recovery guide, check it out for a few minutes. Every place that you can get it is there. And if you already have it, and you already read it, and you're loving it, maybe take a minute and review it on Amazon for me. So thank you very much. I appreciate you hanging in there while I do that. Let's get rolling with me and Dr. B, Bridget Cooper. At the end of the episode, you'll hear all the ways that you can find Dr. B online and get her stuff and follow along because it's all good. I hope you enjoy it. I will see you guys at the end. Dr. B, what up?
What up, Dr. D?
Dr. D, I don't have the DR. You got the DR, the DRB.
You have the DL, though.
I do have the DL. Always on the DL.
Always on the DL. So I've got the Dr. B, you've got the DL.
I'm always on the DL. Dr. Bridget Cooper is back again. I just want to tell you, in case you hadn't noticed, the last time we did this, rave reviews.
Yay.
They laughed, they cried, they can't wait to see it again.
Yay.
So I'm super happy that you came back. You had a lot of really good shit to say, just saying.
I have so much more shit to be technical about it to say. Yeah.
That is a technical term. Yes, it is.
That is a technical term.
Just so everybody knows. So today, excuse me, I haven't gotten over eating a bug before we started recording. I ate a bug.
He thinks this is like Fear Factor or something. Oh, wait, did I steal your thunder? Hang on.
Oh my goodness. Is that some sort of foreshadowing?
I feel like it is foreshadowing.
Some sort of literary device that we just inserted into this podcast. So today we're going to talk about fear. And here's the deal. Now, I have no knowledge of this. I'm hearing it at the same time that you good people are. But I understand that our friend Dr. B is bringing a whole fear model to the table here that we're going to get to kind of feast on a little bit. So here's the deal about fear. Like those of you who listen to me, all the time and are tired of hearing my voice at some point, I'm sure, know that I always talk about, part of the job here is facing the fear. We have to unmask the irrational nature of it in an anxiety disorder. And we're here to learn a new productive way to be afraid so that we can not be afraid of things we don't have to fear. All right. Yet so many of my listeners, my audience, my tribe, my peeps, my pack, if you will, still has a real problem with the way they interpret fear. If I feel fear, even though I may say a million times, your job today is to go out and intentionally do a thing that will make you afraid. I want you to go be afraid today so you can learn a new way to be afraid. When the fear hits, it is declared a 5-alarm fire and it's a disaster. Not because it's scary. It is scary. We all know fear is scary. That's the nature of it. We don't want to feel it. But more so, it's the interpretation of if I feel fear, then I am failing. I should never feel fear. fear can't possibly be a positive tool. How am I supposed to think of as fear as something I can use? So there's this, I don't know if it's a conditioning thing, it's an instinctual thing. There's probably a big combination there, that some people just have a very, very difficult time accepting that fear is a natural thing that we feel sometimes. Sometimes it can be used to our advantage. It's not always indicative of you as a failure or weakness or something wrong with you. So we need, I'm running out of words to give them to new ways for them to think about this. So what you got?
Right. So, okay. So I have so many things, but I won't string them all together at once because we'll play off each other on this one. But the first thing I want to tell you is about a vignette that I like to tell. I feel like people learn through story. So I'm going to tell you a story. So I've been a coach for 15 or 18 years. And a client of mine at one time, he was a small business owner and he was thinking about opening another store, another, location. And he called me and he was processing this with me. And he said, Dr. B, I want to do this, but I'm afraid I might fail. Yeah. So he said, what do I do? And I said, well, you're right. You might fail. And he said, you're the worst coach ever.
You're fired.
Said, okay. Yeah, right? I'm like, okay, just fired myself. I'm like, but hear me out. So the fear is real because the fear is telling you that that could happen because businesses do fail. Mm-hmm. And people do fall on their faces and people do make mistakes that end up costing them some time, effort, what have you. So I said, you've got to ask yourself two questions. First is, what's the absolute worst that could happen? Now, I'm not talking like COVID-19 worst because we had never imagined this, right? And here we are. But in reasonable terms, what's the worst that could happen? And he went through kind of a scenario and I had him really play it out and really tell me the details and, the 5 senses of it. What would happen? What would that look like? I said, okay, all right. So now that you know what that looks like, what would you do if that happened? If the worst comes to be, what's your game plan to get out? How are you going to do that? So if you become bankrupt, whose couch can you sleep on? Like what's your plan? And he said, okay, all right. I said, now the second question you have to ask yourself is, what are you going to do to try to prevent that worst thing from happening? Because what that does is, and this whole fear piece, and this comes into my fear model, is that it allows you to see where you have control and where you don't. So what he had control over in this scenario was planning to avoid the worst thing that could possibly happen and planning for his exit strategy out of the worst thing that could possibly happen. Because there were a lot of variables along the journey when he got to the worst thing that could ever happen that had nothing to do with him, right?
Yeah, sure.
And but when we understand that we have some level of control over things, we tend to settle down. So here comes my model. So years ago, I was working with a company that was dealing with, it was during the investment problems that we were having, all the, the bad people in banking and insurance. And this company was about to go under. And so their customer service staff were fielding crazy amounts of calls of people who were trying to pull their investments and their policies out because they saw the place going under. So I explained to them what they were dealing with. So I called it my fear, trust, control model because it talks about fear, trust, and control.
I was going to fill in the last one.
Yeah, I mean, I figured you probably could. I could have just stopped and you could have done it, but I was afraid you'd fit. No, I'm kidding.
I froze.
So when we have high fear, we have low trust, or vice versa. So when we have low trust, we have high fear. And what happens in order to try to level set those two things is we try to control more usually than we have any business doing. Think of the pandemic and people rushing out to get toilet paper and whatever else they were trying to get, because they felt like if I can at least control my resources, then I can make it through this, right?
Yeah.
Because their trust was low because they didn't know who to trust, what the experts were saying, what information do we really have, what have you. So their trust was low, so their fear was high. And so their control mechanisms went through the roof. That's a natural response to a fearful situation. And when you're dealing with anxiety, some of that fear is disproportionate to the experience you're about to have, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're working with not trusting yourself because in the past, it hasn't gone well, right?
Right.
So then you're trying to control things. But here's the trick. You're trying to often control things that you cannot control. And the original thing you cannot control is the fear.
Well, it's going to be there in this circumstance that we're talking about. We're intentionally making the fear in this situation.
Right.
Yeah.
You're manufacturing it. You're like, here, game on. I'm going to walk through fire.
Right.
And if you recognize that your natural desire is to try to control that which cannot be controlled in order to reduce fear, then you can go back into what you're talking about, which is say, I am going to walk through this. Right. I'm not going to make it as a judgment on myself that I screwed up by feeling the fear, because the fear makes sense based on the fact that I have low control and I have low trust.
Right.
I'm going to feel fear. There's no failure in that. There's no failure in feeling fear when a national pandemic's coming to town and you're trying to figure out how you're going to feed or clothe or wipe your family, right? I mean, these are real fears. So that's understandable. So starting with this like you just picked up on that last piece. So
I'm doing the silent laugh.
Yeah, that was good. So starting with that self-compassion, I think that's what a lot of people miss, that piece. And I was trying to educate that client who told me I was a terrible coach by saying that I'm giving you the compassion that of course you're going to fear failure. Of course you're going to feel like things could fall apart. Of course. And we don't ever practice enough self-compassion. Instead, what we do is we go back to what I call old contracts, and I wrote about this in Pain Rattle recently, is that we go back to our old contracts that say that failure is bad and failure deserves shame.
Yeah.
And shame sticks us in a gully and we can't get out. Instead, if we could see that fear is trying to help us to, one, alert us when there actually is a problem, and two, be able to be the challenge that we need in front of us to be able to see ourselves differently on the other side of it, then we're using fear. We're using that emotion for its higher purpose.
Yeah.
But we often get stuck in that shame piece.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. They really have a problem. Many, not everybody, but many people listening do have that problem. The presence of fear, even though it's intentional and they know it's going to be there, they still have a hard time with the old, like, oh, I was afraid. Yes, I know you were supposed to be afraid. And in this situation, I think there's some measure of power in saying, well, we're actually going to use the fear to our advantage this time. But if they can't get past the idea that just simply experiencing fear is bad, always bad, and a failure, it's hard for them to grab the fear as a tool and use it as part of the recovery process. Right. I'm digging your fear, trust, control model because we could literally glue that right into like the 3-letter therapy things like CBT, ACT, DBT. Right?
Absolutely.
So,
model.
Yes, it absolutely could be glued right into that. Your trust is low because you are afraid of the outcome of feeling anxiety and panic.
Right.
Yes, your fear goes up through the roof because of that, and you feel that you have no control. It's this monster that comes and gets you, and you are terrified, and you think you have to dial 911, and you have to go to the hospital, and what you try to do, nothing is working. And so all the safety behaviors and the rituals and the soothing behaviors become the jacked up control measures.
Right. And the other thing, and I think this is important to point out, is that the other thing, other than all of those mechanisms that you've got in place, those checks and habitual stuff and more obsessive stuff, is simply the idea that they're controlling their opinion of themselves.
Yeah, I would have not picked up on that.
They've always felt shame about or guilt or embarrassment or whatever that they want to name that emotion, about feeling fear, that means they're a failure, that's bad, right? They get to hold that consistent. And that is a level of control. Staying exactly where you've always been is a way of feeling in control. I've often said most of us would rather be right than be happy.
Ooh, that's really good. Let me jump in on that. I do believe that I have encountered, it's my podcast. I can jump in whenever I want.
Go ahead. Let me jump out. Yeah.
I've encountered a fair number of people who I think would fit that description that you just said. They clearly do not want to suffer under the weight of this anxiety problem any longer. There's no doubt about that. Nobody's making a conscious decision to remain a sufferer of an anxiety disorder in any way.
No.
However, the specter of suddenly taking the steps to break that old mold, where they can, and where they're rooting for the Facebook group, the community surrounding the podcast. No, you are strong. You are smart. You can do this. You are worthy. That is a terrifying proposition to, I think, many, many people. And I've had a hard time putting my brain around it. Like, they want to get better, but getting better means being a new them to a certain extent, seeing themselves not as a victim, but as in control and powerful and strong and capable.
Right. Because
it's a whole new way to see themselves.
Space. Yeah. They know that space.
Yeah.
We know the space that we've always been in. So that's why people repeat bad relationships, repeat bad, eating habits, like whatever that is because it's known.
Yeah.
It's that desire to remain in control. If I know the script for this play, I know what to say next. I know what to do next. As miserable as it may be, I know exactly what my next line is. But if I jump and I get off that stage and I go on to a different stage, it may be a much better role, a much better cast, a much better audience, but it's new. And I don't know how to do that. And so that is what sticks most people in doing the same thing they've always done, is because they know they are experts at their own dysfunction. All of us are. We all are so good at our own dysfunction, right? Like, I know how to do mine so well.
I think that's how bad habits survive. We're good at them. We get really good at them. Yeah.
Yeah. We're like practice. It's like, like knee jerk reaction. I know exactly what to do. It's, it's that same feeling of, you work at the same company for 10 years. You don't remember how you got to work and back because that drive, like, anything.
Right.
It's that same kind of like, it's just, there's a groove in there. And so what you're challenging your people, your tribe to do is to walk through the fire of uncertainty in order to get to more uncertainty.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's a tall order. And I get it. However, it's the only way out. You know my story because you read Little Landslides. So you know the story of my upbringing. And when I was in college, when I was reconciling with all those demons, I had something that a phrase that I put up on my wall in giant letters, which said, "The only way out is through."
Yeah.
And there's this, and I remember having to say that over and over again. And the darker it got, the more certain I was that, like, I just hoped that the lights that were coming toward me was like the light and not, an oncoming train. But I knew that it was the only way to get out of that dark tunnel was to keep going through it. Coming back out the other side. Oh, I knew that stuff, but I committed to something bigger. I committed to something more. So.
And the resistance, I like the way so I'm asking them to go directly into uncertainty. I had probably not fully considered the pre-uncertainty that you're describing there. Like, now you have to act a different way and run a different script and execute a different program, which is uncertain enough before you actually get into that fearful, uncertain, scary exposure that I'm telling you to do. I find that there is oftentimes not a resistance, because everybody does want to get better almost universally, for sure. But there's almost a resistance to accepting the idea that you are learning something new. Can you please acknowledge that you are now reading a new script and you're learning new lines and you're learning new marks on the stage and new lighting and a new director and new everything. So when they stumble and they feel, number one, I felt fear. So that's failure, number one. Number two, I didn't do it right. Am I doing it right? Did I do it right? Did I do this right? What if I do this instead of this? There's a tremendous amount of upset and upheaval that comes along with accepting the idea that you are going to suck at this thing for a little while.
Right.
Like, get used to it and embrace it. Embrace the suck of learning something new. It is worth it in the end.
Yeah, I love that you said embrace the suck. I feel like you stole my line, but I will
Totally
let you
stole
take
your
that. No.
Totally did it on purpose.
Totally fine. You can totally, see my attorney about paying
The royalty.
So the other, when people talk like that, what I hear is the voice of their inner critic. So all of us have this, right? Like I'm of the age where I remember Fred Flintstone, and he had the devil and the angel on his shoulders. But we all have this like voice. If you don't know that, you have to go look.
You have to Google it. Sorry, we can't help you.
But the idea that we have this inner critic, and this inner critic to me is like, and I know you don't like talking about inner child and all this stuff. Do it. But
you have special dispensation, Dr. B.
Thank you. The inner critic, in my experience, comes from the wounded kid. It's the kid who got beat up in some way by the world, right? When they still had stars in their eyes or whatever that was. And they got told basically they weren't good enough in some way. And so, or many ways. And so they have this voice inside of themselves. We all do. We all have this inner critic that it like when something goes wrong or when something might go wrong, it's like the I told you so, told you so, told you so. And fear kicks in because the inner critic wants to like hold you in that narrative, right?
Yeah.
So I often say you need to become friends with your inner critic, because your inner critic has fears for a reason, because quite frankly, like, and we have to be honest with ourselves and look ourselves in the mirror. We've let ourselves down before, right? Like whether it's on us or whether it's in, jobs or people or whatever, we've made mistakes. And so our inner critic is right to sound the alarm, to say, whoa, what are you doing? You're going to do this thing. And letting them know, like, I hear you. I hear you that I have let you down in the past. And then we go back to that example that I gave in the beginning about my client. And we say, if the worst thing happens, this is how I'm going to handle it. And here's what I'm going to do to try to prevent it in the first place.
Yeah.
Just like we would any kid who's afraid of the dark, afraid of whatever, you don't crawl under the bed and like make noises, right? You check under the bed and you make sure that they're going to feel comfortable, right? And if anything happens, run into mom and dad's room, right? Like you give them a plan. So it's the same thing with our inner critic, which is that instead of, I get so irritated by the platitudes that we offer in the positive thinking, like we're gonna mantra ourselves right out of this. And no, because here's what happens. The inner critic, their bullshit detector is so refined, like they could hear a pin drop in another area code. Okay. They hear everything.
Yeah.
So if you bullshit them by being like, I'm going to do this perfectly and whatever, I have all the power of the universe behind me and nothing can go wrong. The inner critic's like, bullshit.
Right.
And they're like, watch her fail. We can't wait. Right. And like, they're waiting with like popcorn, like eating popcorn, just watching, waiting for you to totally fall on your face. Instead, if you're like, I hear you. Yeah, you're right. I might fail. But here's what I'm going to do to prevent it. And here's what I'm going to do if it happens.
This is clearly you have a life, so I would not expect you to be listening to my podcast. But the episode before this one, you can talk about inner child all you want, because when you are done, you come right back with the wrecking ball and you are right back on the program, because I spoke at length for a full 30 minutes about how you cannot bullshit your protective mechanisms.
You can't.
Bullshit. You can't. They will have none of it. So, I mean, for me, it was in the context of panic and anxiety rushes where you cannot bullshit your lizard brain. It's gonna say, nonsense. Stop telling me everything is fine. Clearly, it is not.
It's not fine. Oh, and this is what happens. But you have to get underneath this, right?
Yeah.
Why does that not work? Why does the positive affirmation, why is the bullshit detector, why does that actually not just not work, but why does it actually work against you and make it harder? I'll tell you.
I'm fist pumping those of you who cannot see, because it's
okay. Because raise your hand, and don't do this if you need both hands on the wheel. Raise your hand if you love being told that you're right. I mean, you're wrong. Excuse me. Love being told that you're wrong. No one No one likes to be told that they're wrong. Not one person. And I've had people, honest to God, I've done workshops. People are like, I love to be told that I'm wrong because then I can learn. I'm like, oh my God, you're such a liar. Okay. You like to be told that you're wrong when you already have the answer of how you can show up to be right. Like, that's just how we roll.
Right.
So when you do this, when you say to your inner critic or your lizard brain, you're wrong, I've got this, there's nothing to fear, everything's perfect. What happens is you've just told a very essential part of yourself that you're wrong.
Yeah.
And when you're told that you're wrong, what do?
Yeah, you dig in.
You dig in and you tell me, here's the important part, this from a cognitive behavioral standpoint. You dig in and then you restate for yourself all the reasons why you're correct. So anybody who's ever done motivational interviewing, you're trying to get someone to say the thing that's going to help them get out of the thing that they're in. But in fact, what you're having them do is deepen the grooves in the record. Again, another old school reference, deepen the grooves to make it even more certain that they believe the bad idea, the failure script, because you've just told them to defend it. Stop it.
Yeah. And
stop telling your lizard brain and your inner critic how to defend the very thing you want them to let go of.
Because that's exactly what it will do. It only understands the experience of the positive outcome. It doesn't understand telling it that there's a positive outcome. You must create the positive outcome so it sees it. Oh shit, you just shattered my argument, says the lizard brain.
Right. And that's where it comes back to the fear, trust, control model. Because if you think about it, what you're actually doing is you're building trust with your lizard brain. You're building trust with your inner critic so that their fear can go down. Mm-hmm. And the trust, the control mechanisms, all those fail-safe things, those obsessive things that we do to try to create some semblance and illusion of control, those can diminish.
Yeah, but if they don't, we run in that situation where then the positive outcome is then attributed to that amped up control mechanism. See, I snapped a rubber band, I colored, I called my mom, I got water, I ran back home, and I made it.
Right.
As opposed to, I didn't do any of those things. I let go of that ability to control, and it still turned out okay.
Right.
Okay. And what I find also, not only does those protective mechanisms, your inner critic, your lizard brain, this is so good, by the way. This is not where I thought this was going, but this is I'm having such a good time with this.
Buckle up, buttercup.
Buckle up. That's exactly right. We do not know what's coming in the next 5 minutes, so stay tuned, people. But those inner protective mechanisms that are at play here, that think they are doing their job and keeping us safe, when you do that positive affirmation, the mantras, the words, I'm going to word my way out of this uncomfortable situation, and the lizard brain digs in and restates all the reasons. No. Clearly there is something wrong here. You are dizzy. It is hard to breathe, blah, blah, blah. It will restate the whole thing. And it will then decide, see, what you're doing ain't working. And then you now went up to another level of fear. All my tools don't work.
Now I need more tools.
Yes.
I got to get more tools.
What do I do now? My this too shall pass isn't working. My grounding isn't working. My feeling the grass on my feet is not working this time.
Right.
And I find that it sometimes is a borderline traumatic experience.
Yeah.
Repeated again and again and again. When somebody's teaching them, feel your feet on the ground, feel the cool water, blah, 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 this too shall pass, say you are a goddess and a warrior, and it doesn't work, it cements the avoidance and fear. It's like, no, see, there's nothing works for me. This is hopeless. I can't do it.
It's hopeless. I'm a failure. Or I have to do more of that because I clearly didn't do enough. So we keep doing that.
I need to find some other things I could pile on top of that too. What else can I chant or say or yes.
Exactly. But and this is very Buddhist. But
I'm in.
Okay. So one of the things about feelings is the same thing with inner critic and lizard brain, is that trying to talk yourself out of one is the surefire way to cement, deepen, strengthen it over, right? Because it wants to prove to you that it has validity, that it's there. Yeah. Because you shove it down and it grows. It's like planting a seed, right? Or you numb it out and then you've got more problems because you're an addict, right? Or, whatever else,
Yeah.
So what you actually have to do is, you said, this too shall pass. And I kind of almost jumped on it because I'm like, that's one of the only ones that might work. Because here's the thing is that it will eventually pass. There's never been anyone who's been stuck
Forever.
Forever in a particular feeling. Feelings, they come, they teach us something if we allow them to, and then they go. They're replaced by something else if we allow them to simply be there. We used to do this model when I worked in addiction services, and we talked about depression as not being the lowest of all feelings, but the surface of the lowest of all feelings, of that hovering above and the struggle to hover above so that they didn't go as low as they needed to go to be able to do the healing, to be able to like fight that.
Yeah.
In the struggle to fight the feeling makes the feeling bigger, and it allows you to not use it like forces you to not use your power where it's supposed to be, which is to get to the other side of it. Mm-hmm. So just denying it and fighting it is actually counterproductive to the very thing you want, which is for it to go away.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I can concur with you on the this too shall pass. The problem with this too shall pass, or that idea of that, is it's usually glued to a bunch of stuff that makes it not pass as quickly as it otherwise could. So this too shall pass is in fact valid. And I always say, like, you could do something or you can do nothing.
Right.
It's all going to wind up in the same place, and nothing is easier and faster. So
it is easier and faster.
You have to detach that mantra or that concept from all the other stuff. It has to be its own.
And to understand the value judgment behind it, which is this too shall pass, does not mean that it's minimal.
Very good. Correct.
It does not mean that it isn't agonizing. It does not mean that it isn't tragic and awful and terrible and bloody. Mm-hmm. This too shall pass there's no temperature check on its intensity. It's simply that it will. It's about time, not about intensity.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when people say this too shall pass, what they're doing is they're like patting you on the head and saying it's no big deal.
Right. But it is.
And it is. And it feels like it's the biggest thing you've ever faced in your life. Like it just feels insurmountable. However, you and I both know, having walked through fire and stood in it for too damn long, there is another side to it.
Yeah.
There is a walking through it.
There is. And I think I would add that this too shall pass is not a prediction. It's an observation. Yeah. So a lot of people try to use that as a tool that says, if I say it, I will make it pass. And you won't. Like, it's going to pass on its own. The mechanism is going to play itself out no matter what it is. In the case of, the dry stuff like panic and anxiety that I'm talking about, the adrenaline is the adrenaline. You can't, that's it. It's just going to have to play itself out. And so you cannot make it go away by repeating this too shall pass.
Right.
And sometimes you make it worse.
And I always go back to when there's any feeling that's coming to us is, and this is again, not to platitude or anything else, is to be grateful for it. Because it's trying to move you from a place that you are to a place that you're not. Even when it's defective, right? Even when it's broken, hurting you, right? It's doing that. Like, you would not be the same person you are today if you had not gone through those trials. Now, in the moment, to sit there and thank them is BS, because you're just like, this sucks, right? But if you can detach, and you use that word detach from that experience in that moment, be like, oh, all right, here it comes. This is going to suck. This is, yep. And you know what? At some point, I'm going to be on the other side of it. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I know because Drew and Dr. B told me, and, and DL would never lie to me. And I don't know this Dr. B, but he seems to think she's cool. So there is another side to it, but just to hold at some point in the future, there will be some gratitude to be had for having had it show up to teach you whatever it needed to teach you. And the lesson might be, sorry, spoiler alert, it might be to detach from more in your life.
Yeah.
Not from ever feeling.
No.
Detaching from the outcome and the control that you perceive that you have over something, because you don't have it.
That's a whole nother. I love a whole nother. That's a whole nother episode we'll do together.
It is. I mean,
detaching from the, you're right. You're not detaching from feeling, and people sometimes get confused by this. So to bring it back to the fear thing, we're not telling you to never feel fear.
No.
And therefore, we're not telling you to never feel sad or disappointed or angry or anything like that. We are humans. We are trying to become better humans, not dehumanized in this process. Correct. All right. So
tolerate the discomfort, to tolerate the
correct. Correct.
And we could do a whole show on this about
yes.
that. Try to numb ourselves out from feeling the wide spectrum of emotions that we feel, which is why a lot of people feel failure when they feel fear or sadness or anything bad.
Yes.
Because we, especially in our culture, have said that any extreme emotion is bad.
Yeah.
You're bad. You're out of control. Let me give you a prescription. Let me do something to kind of stop you. And you know all about the prescription, rabbit hole. Try to make this more comfortable for you. Unfortunately, life is uncomfortable.
Some days it is. Yes, that's true. And so I think the detachment from fear is not feeling fear. It's detaching from the judgment about feeling fear. So correct. I can be afraid. That's fine. I do not have to be afraid that I am afraid.
Correct. Yeah, right. I don't have to feed into it by trying to control it. Detachment is letting go of the idea that you can control anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the detachment.
There's a tremendous amount of control that is found when you stop trying to control things. Amazing how that works. Suddenly it's like, oh shit, things go the way I want them to go when I stop trying to make them go that way.
Oh my God.
How does that happen?
I'm controlling my detachment. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Twilight Zone moment, right?
So we're about 30 minutes in, which is, we probably should try and wrap it up. This was one of the favorite 30 minutes I've ever spent in 5 years of podcasting. Thank you so much. And I am guessing that people are just going to have a ton of questions. So wherever you are listening to this, reach out with the questions and I will do my best to funnel them through to Bridget here. And, I'll get them answered for you. Where can people find you, Dr. B?
They can find me on Instagram, Dr. Bridget Cooper, on Facebook, Bridget Cooper, and on my website at drbridgetcooper.com.
Yeah, I'll link everything in the show notes. So you have all of Dr. B's links. Go over and check her out, follow along with her. And we want to do more of these? I so want to do more of these with you.
And can I do a shameless book club?
Yes, you have to do a shameless book club.
Okay, sorry, I have to do a shameless book plug because here's the thing. We just talked about fear, and fear is a form of pain. And what your listeners are experiencing is pain. Mm-hmm. We all experience pain. So my latest book is called Pain Rebel. And it is about changing that relationship to pain so that you can see it, experience it differently, and therefore have a better, more joyful, more abundant life. So you can check that out through my website or on Amazon.
Yeah, all the links are there. I'll put a link right to your Amazon page also in the show notes, so check it out. And you guys know, before, probably at the beginning of this episode, I will have pre-recorded my shameless book plug. I'll say this while we're recording. I'll go on a limb here. When we are done recording, we should maybe find a way where people can get your book and my book together.
Hell yeah.
Special way. And I would like to talk to you about a way that you and I could stand on a stage together and do this sometimes.
Oh, hell yeah. But at a time we don't have to wear a mask.
I know, that would be good. Maybe not that. How about not next week, but it would be really great to be able to do some of these things with you because it's always so productive when we get together.
Yeah, we're solving the world's problems.
I believe we are. I mean, my coffee mug is still empty, so we haven't solved that, but we'll work on that next.
We'll refill.
Guys, thank you for coming by. As always, I do not know what episode number this was. I'll have said it in my pre-recorded intro, but I have to remind you that if you're listening on iTunes or any place where you can rate and review the podcast, please rate and review the podcast, because if you like it, then it'll help other people find it. Yeah. Hello. 5-star. There's no reason for anything else. If you don't do it for me, at least do it for Dr. B. I mean, she clearly deserves it. Yeah, and that's it. So thanks for coming by. We'll see you guys next week, and keep moving forward. It's a thing.
See the light.
Let me awkwardly stop the recording here.
Somebody told me that you do or die, but I believe all you can do is try. And as the city stands 10 stories high, I'm gonna live my life. It's all around you, you can breathe it in. And this is where your story begins. You got the feeling that you're gonna win. Yeah, you're on your way. It's in the afterglow. It's in the lyrics of the songs we know. It's in these feelings that you never show. Yeah, you're doing fine. It's all around you.